Welcome learners to this mini lecture covering two sections of Techniques in Civilization. This mini lecture will cover Section 10, the influence of biology, and Section 11, from destruction to conservation. So we look at the influence of biology on engineering in the Neo-Technique phase. We can point to three specific examples and then look at one more general example, but the airplane, moving pictures, Bell's telephone, all three of those developments, major inventions of the Neo-Technique phase, all were impacted by the study of living organisms, and also the rethinking of the importance of shapes came out of this need, really this need for efficiency, and there's nothing more efficient than nature and some of the things that go on with living organisms. So engineers definitely took notice of that. We're going to look at the airplane, moving pictures, and Bell's telephone in a little more detail in these three following slides. The airplane, as you know, first sustained flight by Wilbur Orville Wright. Of course, there were a lot of people who were attempting to invent the airplane at that time, and they knew they had it, but they couldn't steer it. And one of the breakthroughs that they had steering was they studied the flight of soaring birds, like the gull and the hawk, and they were able to solve the problem of steering by adapting their plane from watching the flight of those birds. Also in later development, studying the way fish move through water was also important. If we look at moving picture, one of the discovery of the basis of illusion of movement, that was Joseph Plateau, and this was huge for the moving picture. I'm going to show you a video here that shows one of his series of drawings that he used to spin through this little machine. But you know, basically, I think I can remember doing this as a kid. Maybe you can too, where you take a series of a little pad of paper and draw a series of drawings, each one slightly different than the previous, and then flip through it real quickly. It gives the illusion of movement. Well, Plateau did the same thing. So I'm going to play this video for you. What you're going to see is his drawing of actually a devil's head, and as you can see there, it's changing. The face is changing its expression. This was from Plateau and some of the drawings he did. Now this was used, and you may be saying, well, what does this have to do with biology? But Edward Muybridge ended up using this type of technology and this idea in studying the movement of animals. And so actually, and this is kind of odd, but the former governor of California, Leland Stanford, who was a paleotechnic giant, you know, he was an industrialist, a businessman. He was also a racehorse owner who had taken a position on a popularly debated question of the time, and that was whether all four of a horse's hooves are off the ground at the same time during a gallop. And so he and Muybridge had worked on this, and Muybridge had taken a series of photos of a horse in motion and was able to use these photos, put these photos together to create this video, which is down in the lower right of the screen. You can see it's the same type of an illusion, and so this gives the illusion of the horse in motion. Now, incidentally, Leland Stanford, who was a key investor in the Central Pacific Railroad and also the director of Wells Fargo, published a book called The Horse in Motion. And in that book, he used these photos, which were Edward Muybridge's, and gave Muybridge no credit at all in the book. He used his research, he used his photos, and it was interesting. He really basically took advantage of Muybridge, because Muybridge had not had any kind of reputation in the scientific community. So, you know, once again, when we talk about exploitation and this idea of the industrialists and the capitalists, that, you know, hey, it's every man for themselves, and you know, if you're not crafty enough to get your way or get credit for your designs, then too bad for you. But anyway, that gave really basis for the moving picture. which we know is invented by Thomas Edison. And then Bell's telephone. Alexander Graham Bell designed the receiver by modeling it after the bones and diaphragm of the human inner ear. So if we look at those key inventions of the Neotechnic phase, we know that they were all influenced by biology. So now we look at from destruction to conservation. Remember that during the Paleotechnic phase we talked about the huge waste, the exploitation, and a lack of any kind of concern for efficiency, either for an exploitation of the people, an exploitation of nature, or so on. And as we look at this new idea of conservation, George Perkins Marsh comes to the forefront, and he was one of America's first environmentalists, considered by some to be the first environmentalist. He wrote a book called Man and Nature, and basically it's one of the first works to document the effects of human action on the environment and helped to launch the modern conservation movement. And basically Marsh argued that ancient Mediterranean civilizations collapsed through environmental degradation, especially deforestation, which led to eroded soils and led to decreased soil productivity. He argued that the same types of trends could be found occurring in the United States. So, very important individual from the standpoint of trying to shed some light on, hey, what are we doing to the environment here, and what kind of lasting impacts is this going to have? You know, when we think about it, I just heard this the other day, and I forget on what program, but you know, humans have been on the earth, and I heard this the other day, for 6 million years. And when you think about it, it's a blink of an eye as far as what we're talking about here, from the Paleotechnic phase to where we are now. Really, just such a small little bit of time, and we've really exploded the environment of the earth in that time. So, kind of interesting to think about. Sad, tragic at the same time. As we look at soil conservation, became important. And this idea that, hey, we need to use this soil to be able to produce agricultural products year after year over time. And so the use of human excrement for fertilizers, and this was established through better sanitation, through sewage treatment plants and things like that. And also the idea of rotating crops, which helped to fix nitrogen levels in the soils. As nitrogen was taken out by certain plants and crops, certain other crops would be planted, which would replenish those soils. Sorry about that interruption. Okay, another thing that, I guess, key idea of this Neotechnic phase, you know, during the Paleotechnic phase we talked about growth and multiplication of machines. During the Neotechnic phase, we're going to look more at refinement, diminution, and partial elimination of the machine. And you know, basically the machine got smaller, more efficient, and you could get more done with fewer machines. Is kind of the trend that we're looking at there. So once again, following this idea of conservation, if we can get more done with one machine than with 25 machines, great. You know, so anyway, important little fact there. All right, and then finally, artificial environment. Agriculture benefited by this this idea of creating the environment needed to grow crops, for instance, through greenhouses. Also, in adjusting industrial production to seasonal changes of work enforced by nature and agriculture. So those are just some of the things. In the Neotechnic phase, with regard to conservation. All right, so as we look at a summary, we know with the Neotechnic phase, and the new concern for efficiency, that the study of living organisms became increasingly important. Also during this time, there was a shift, somewhat of a shift, not a total shift, but somewhat of a shift from destruction of the environment to conservation. Now we know obviously we're not there yet, and we're still doing damage to the environment, but there was a shift, I guess, of being aware of that and taking measures to try to alleviate that as much as possible. So as always, make sure to complete the activities that you have, and also complete the essay question that corresponds with this mini lecture. And there'll be 2 essay questions, one for section 10 and one for section 11. So thank you and for listening to this mini lecture, and have a nice day.